Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Venture Visionaries podcast. I'm your host, Fred Schonberg. On today's show, we have John Stapleton. John is a seasoned entrepreneur and investor with over 30 years of experience in the fast-moving consumer goods sector. He was co-founder of the new Covent Garden Soup Company and Little Dish, and John has a remarkable track record of creating disruptive, consumer-led brands that prioritize health, quality, and sustainability. Today, we're going to talk about his journey into CPG, the disruptive trends shaping the food industry, and the unique approach of mission ventures in supporting startups and his insights on sustainability and entrepreneurship. Please join me in welcoming John Stapleton. John, welcome to the show.
Wow, Fred, that's a wonderful introduction. Thank you. I hope I can live up to it. When people say things like that, it's wonderful to hear. But it wasn't like that then. This is all in hindsight, looking back. So I'd love to think that everything was planned, that I knew what I was doing at all stages. I certainly didn't. But 25, 35 years later, I have a few stories to tell.
Can you imagine what it's going to sound like when we interview you 10 years from now?
I don't want to think about that. I don't think anybody else does either, frankly. But let's see.
Very true, very true. Well, why don't we start there, maybe at the beginning of what inspired you to enter the fast-moving consumer goods sector and how that journey led to new Covent Garden Soup Company and Little Dish.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, have an unusual story in that I came straight out of university and did New Covent Garden Soup. So I had no prior knowledge of anything useful or sensible or traditional or anything like that at all. And I guess I say this, flippantly, but I guess it's some truth in it. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I just serendipitously met this guy called Andrew, and it was Andrew's idea. Fresh soup in a carton was Andrew's idea. He just didn't know how to go about doing it, and he needed help, like we all do with our ideas. And he met me. We met actually in Reading University. I was studying there for food science and technology, a master's in that. And he came there because he lived nearby and he recognized it was a center of excellence. And he wanted to speak to the experts there about the scientists about how about doing this. And he asked them lots of interesting questions. And from what I gathered, they had no idea what he was talking about. This mad guy with this crazy idea. I mean, science and entrepreneurship just don't mix, right? But they say one thing. They said, there's this Irish guy here who's finishing off his master's. Maybe he might be able to help you. And I honestly think they were just trying to get rid of him because they couldn't really they said all sorts of non-entrepreneurial things like, yeah, well, if it's such a good idea, somebody would have done it by now. And of course, he was really frustrated with that. So we went down to the pub at lunchtime, and we stayed there till closing time. And we weren't drinking, actually. We were just talking and arguing and talking. There's a crazy idea about putting fresh soup in a carton. Fresh soup to start with didn't exist. All liquid soup was in a can back then. So it was kind of like, why would you do that? Or how do you go about doing it? And what's the point of it? And at the end of the evening, we were kicked out, like I say, for the end of closing time with the pub. And we had all these questions lined up. We had talked for hours, and all we had was questions. And we thought, basically, the only way we could answer any of these questions is by actually doing it. So we did. Now, I had nothing to lose. I didn't really know what I was doing. And as it turns out, they did it, Andrew. But I'm a great believer in, if you don't know how high that mountain is when you start out, then you're inclined to crack on doing it. When you realize it's really, really steep, that's when you think, what am I doing here? But you're so far up, then you keep going. So that was it for me. That was, inspired me to get into the food industry. That was it. Wrong place at wrong time.
I love that as the origin story. It's so great. And I love that sort of nagging feeling of like, I have more questions here. I need to explore this. And that often is what leads entrepreneurs into very interesting territories.
Indeed.
So yeah, I was going to say, one of the other things is, you're co-founder of Mission Ventures. How does the company differentiate itself from traditional investment firms in supporting startups within the food and beverage industry?
Okay, now we've taken a big leap there. Now, Mission Ventures came after I sold my third business. So I've had three businesses, two successes and one failure. The one failure was in the States, two successes were in the UK. But and that kind of covers 25 years. And then I sold my third business, and then I set up Mission Ventures. Now, Mission Ventures, everybody thinks this, and maybe we should rethink the name. Everybody thinks it's an investment firm or it's a fund or something like that, because ventures, right? But it's not. It's actually more of I got to do it justice now. It's more of an accelerator stroke incubator. What we do is we don't invest, but we put a lot of effort into finding investment for businesses, for early stage food and drink businesses, or certainly consumer facing goods businesses. And we then help them spend the money wisely. One of the major questions, of course, any investment, and I have other investment hats on, in any business you're looking to invest in, is how much do you want to raise and what do you want to spend it on? So we help small businesses founders, co-founders, entrepreneurs, people at a very early stage, really in concept stage, pre-revenue, or maybe a little bit after having launched, figure out what they want to do to grow, figure out what they think about it, and then really tell them what the reality is, how you can grow, what you should do, therefore what you need to spend the money on, and therefore how much money you need to spend. So a lot of pre-raise help involved. And then when they get the money, not from us, but from others, that is investment into their business. We help them spend that money wisely. We hold their hand, make sure the best bang for their buck, and try to figure out what the return on investment is for shareholders, so they can have this conversation with shareholders ahead of the time, so they can appear wise about this. If they haven't done it themselves before, how are they going to know this? So it's really important to help them really understand where the return on investment really comes from. So what they should be spending their little amount of money that they start with and that they raised, and prove some milestones along the way, so they can then go back to the same shareholders and say, hey, look, I actually did what I said I was going to do, which is not that easy to do. And here's some evidence why what I said before, which was assumption, is now actually reality. And I do know what I'm talking about, so give me some more money. And right. If that's the case, the investors will be going like, yeah, sure, how much do you want? So the idea is to help those small businesses get money, spend it wisely, and have a proper investment strategy that they can follow over time. That's what we do for small businesses. Now, we work closely with larger businesses too, which I talk about, but we kind of play two sides of the coin. We help small businesses directly, we help larger businesses indirectly.
Well, maybe we'll come back to the large business question in a second. One of the things that struck me, and I think why we did the huge jump, right, of 25 years, is I'm very interested in what, if there are any consistencies in terms of the advice that you give founders that maybe came from those three companies you founded. Is there something that is a learned insight from those first three that you find yourself consistently telling new founders?
Oh yeah, loads of things. I if you have to really put my finger on the one that's the most important of all, and I think maybe New Covent Garden is a good example of this. Little Dish is too, and even the business that failed is too, which was also a fresh soup business in the Bay Area in California. That point is really, don't be a slave to the conventional wisdom. I think so many ideas are kind of knocked on the head by people who are slaves to the conventional wisdom, certainly in large businesses. And this is one of the things we try to help large businesses with, is like they figured out really good ways of being efficient and being effective and growing over time, many, many decades. So they kind of think, let's not mess with that. That works. But actually, that is continuing to deliver the conventional wisdom. Right back in 1987, believe it or not, when we set up New Covent Garden Soup Company, all liquid soup came in a can, right? And that was the way it was done. And we were told we were crazy to think of doing it a different way. You know, basically, they said 20, 30 things to us that we were crazy, but there are three things stuck in my mind. They said, first of all, if you don't sterilize a soup, which is what canning is all about, it's ultra sterilizing. It kills everything, including the flavor and the nutritional benefit, but it kills anything that could be in there that's going to do you harm, give you food poisoning, or kill you, obviously. So it kills all that, makes it very safe. So they said to us, and I was a food scientist, so I kind of understood them, that they said, if you don't put it through a canning process, that's why all liquid soup is in a can, you will kill somebody. Well, when we sold the business 10 years later, we had sold about 50 million cartons of soup, and we hadn't killed one person at that stage, to my knowledge. So that wasn't true. And then they said,
John, that's a really good KPI for anybody in the food and beverage industry.
Don't kill anybody. Yeah, exactly. And that was kind of basic steps. So we took it seriously, obviously. We want to develop a process that was not going to kill anybody or not going to make people ill. So we developed the whole process, and that's where I came in at the time. We patented the process, and we made a novel product. It was great. It was wonderful. Looking back on it now, I'm not sure if it was necessary, but at the time, to get over the hurdle of people saying you kill somebody, we had to make sure that we weren't going to kill somebody. But the whole point was, don't even do it because you will kill somebody. So making soup is all about canning. But that is the conventional wisdom. And then they said, don't put it in a carton because people won't know if milk goes in a carton, don't be silly. And why would you put soup in a carton? And the thing that people loved about it was the carton in the end, it turned out. And then they said things like, putting soup in the chiller. And why would you put soup in the chiller? It's a stupid idea. There's already a destination point. It's called the soup aisle. It already has a name. So why mess with that, So all these things are reinforcing the conventional wisdom. We wanted our soup to taste of, funnily enough, the ingredients we put into the soup, right? Actually, I have a carton here from an earlier call. This is the carton. We put soup into the carton and didn't pasteurize it. It didn't sterilize it. But we wanted the soup to taste of the ingredients, not of the process that was used to make it safe, which kills the flavor and Canned soup, it's a different product. It just tastes like canned soup. Fresh soup tastes of the ingredients you put into it, and those are objective. But to do that, you couldn't listen to the conventional wisdom. You have to have the courage of your convictions to say, no, I think this is a great idea. And really importantly, loads of other people will think it's a great idea too, and they'll buy it, and we can make a business out of it. So it's not just a hobby, it's actually a business proposition. And I think that's the one thing I'd say. It's different, everybody's idea is different in different categories and different industries, of course. But the conventional wisdom ties you down time and time again. And there's lots of reasons for it, why people cling on to it, and it's good. So, but I'm not saying don't do that, but if you want to do something new and be entrepreneurial and creative and innovative, you got to leave that behind.
So maybe that's an interesting transition to some of the work you do in and around the larger enterprises, because they're built on conventional wisdom, right? They got big for a reason, and it's about efficiency. They had an insight maybe that was novel at the time, and then efficient, and they created that conventional wisdom, and that's where their stock price comes from and their revenue. How do you innovate in and around and with larger companies like that?
Yeah, and that's the other thing that we do at Mission Ventures. I hope quite well. And you know, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there isn't a place for large corporate food industry. Of course there is, with all the problems that it brings. But of course, it works really well at lots of times. And when I'm talking to entrepreneurs, I'm saying, don't try to compete with the big guys on price or efficiency, or because that's not where you can win. You can never ever win, but you can win on other things, and you can win on being entrepreneurial, first to market, interesting ideas, understanding the consumer, being entrepreneurial, moving quickly. And I think that's what a lot of smart, larger businesses get. So let me come back to some examples we have there, but in terms of Mission Ventures, we've got loads of projects I can choose from, but there's three I can think of very quickly. And the people will recognize these in the UK, certainly, maybe overseas to a certain extent, but there's a large company called Warburton's, which is the largest bakery in the UK. They make lots of bread, lots of different types of bread. They're very good at making bread. In fact, they just bought another bread company, so they're even bigger than they were when we started talking to them. And we sat down with them and we said, like, okay, being more entrepreneurial, they love that idea, but what does it really mean? Okay, well, what we decided to do between us, Mission Ventures, went out and found lots of small businesses that had something to do with baking. Now, it could be bread, but it's unlikely because Warburton's do all the bread. It could be biscuits, it could be cookie dough, it could be baking snacks that are healthy versions of stuff that would otherwise be fried. It could be anything. And so you can stretch it as far as you want. So long as it has a business idea, business proposition, and bring those businesses to us and have them pitch. Do what we do, help them prepare for what investment is all about. Have them pitch to us, and we'll decide which ones to invest in. Then we set up a little joint venture between Warburton's and ourselves called Batch. Warburton's put money into it, and we then invested that into these small businesses. Obviously, we're on the inside helping them to then invest the money wisely, spend the money wisely, and come out the other end. Now, what Warburton's get from that is, or what any large corporation can get from that, is getting closer to smaller businesses, but keeping it at an arm's length. So they're not managing them, we're managing them. We're dealing with all the headaches. We're all ex-entrepreneurs ourselves, so we know what that world is like. So we were dealing with those guys, and we're trying to keep them close, but not too close to the large corporates, so they can understand, and they can actually send their rising stars to go and sit on the board or spend some time with these young guys, understand entrepreneurial thinking, pick the good bits that they know, that'll work at home, bring it back to the bit and incorporate it, hothouse it. And of course, if they want to actually invest in business outright or buy the business outright, they've got the benefit of 5 years due diligence sitting there watching this business all the time. So at arm's length, so all the investment is off balance sheet, so they don't take any risk. If it goes belly up, then tough. That's not great, but it doesn't affect them because we are in the middle. We're managing it. So it's de-risking, and those businesses, those corporates who really get that, who recognize there is a place for entrepreneurship without upsetting what they do really well. You don't want to suddenly go, I'm going to be an entrepreneur tomorrow, and then your share price goes down because you don't hit your quarterly numbers, because it takes a while to get good at this and get efficient at this. So we sit in the middle, helping and facilitating the good bits, keeping at arm's length the bad bits, if you like, or the watch-outs, and managing the process. And there are other examples too I could talk about. We did a project with Sainsbury's on Thrive, to help their diversity inclusion supply into Sainsbury's. Basically went out to find lots of businesses started by Black entrepreneurs. They had very poor representation of that sector of society. We found 10 more for them. And then we worked with a hospital called Impact on Urban Health with the Good Food Project. We went out to find businesses that could develop healthy versions of existing stuff. It's a big problem in the food industry right now. Everything seems to be unhealthy. Not quite true, but we help the small guys with really interesting ideas, business ideas, business propositions to bring new products to market and to understand how they can do that. Work with the charity, and the charity brought money to help that actually work. And we sprinkle our magic dust in the meantime to help the business spend the money wisely. So that's what we do. We break small and large and try to get the large business absorbing the benefits of the small business while not ruining the small business in the process.
Yeah. Maybe with the Warburton's example, we've certainly seen a lot in the States, right, of these types of partnerships where it seems like there's some enthusiasm around innovation, entrepreneurship. They spin something up, and then when the core business is under threat in any way, this disappears, right? And then the way it was brought to me was this idea of is the juice worth the squeeze? Like, what's in it for the big company besides the like, oh, we're close to entrepreneurship and we're going to absorb some entrepreneurial thinking here. How do they justify it up the food chain of the investment in something like this?
Yeah, I mean, that's great. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Is the pain worth the benefit? And you know, as an entrepreneur, you have to ask yourself that every day. Never mind purely in an entrepreneurial world. All I can say is you have to believe that there's some benefit in entrepreneurship. You have to understand what you do well, and ring fence that. Make sure you keep doing that, but also understand the things you don't do well. You know, how quickly does your innovate? Do you do innovation? Or is it renovation? Is it just like twiddling around the edges of the stuff that you've got already? Or do you do real innovation? Do you really talk to your consumer or your customer to know what they need? A lot of the time, I'm not saying all or large organizations are like this. In fact, Warburton's were not, where they're very smart about what they do well and what they would like to do more of. But a lot of organizations are quite arrogant about this works. It's to your point earlier. Look, the last 20, 30 years, it's been great. Don't knock it. I'm the guy, and that's great. But up to a point, then you have to realize where you could grow. And if your growth begins to slow down, then okay, how can you recharge that growth? And then you're into the question of, you know, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is the entrepreneurial effect worth it? Because you can very easily ruin your business by becoming too entrepreneurial. And then people don't really get it, or they don't really understand it, or a lot of naysayers saying in the background, God, I told you shouldn't have done this. I told you this was a bad idea. Now look what's happening. And, you know, it's all your fault. So you got all these kind of emotional things going on in your business that you really don't want to get into. So if you that's what we recognize. And we thought if we can do it at arm's length by reducing the risk. So guess what? If one of these businesses that we invest in goes belly up and goes bust, and what? 60% go bust in the first year anyway, and 90% go bust anyway. You're talking about a handful, hopefully with our insight and our mission map and mission ventures and help and assistance, and hopefully we'll be able to write those odds a little bit. But nothing is guaranteed in this world. So if something goes belly up, then you want to be able to kind of say nothing about it if at all possible. And it's so small in the overall mix of things, it doesn't hit the headlines because it's off balance sheet and it's really mission ventures and it's nothing to do with Warburton's. So it's easier enough to do that. I think the issue really is the pain comes when you're trying to bring that business into your own business as a corporate entity and then absorb them into the business. And they've got like 10, 20, 30, $1 million worth of revenue or pounds worth of revenue. Then they're worth putting attention at. And then that's often the case where you put so much attention and you squeeze into debt because you try to, instead of going this way, you go that way. And you bring too many checks and balances to bear and corporate governance and all the things that are important, but not to the point of overshadowing the entrepreneurial nature of the business you brought in. So I think really the trick is, and at that point, it's really relevant. Is the juice worth the squeeze at that stage? I don't know. That's further down the line, and you know, Mission Ventures helps you get there, but doesn't actually. You got to do that for yourself.
Yeah, very interesting. So you're at the forefront of the FMCG world. What challenges do you see for entrepreneurs or even large companies in innovating in this space today?
I think the issue is always about consumer insight. I mean, I could talk earlier about having the courage of conviction, and that's all well and good. It's easy to say, what's really difficult to do? And the courage comes from doing stuff yourself, and the conviction comes from really understanding what the consumer wants. So I think one of the mistakes that entrepreneurs can make a lot of the time is thinking they know the consumer very well, because a lot of the time, you give up your job and you decide because you're so frustrated you can't find this thing, and you said if only this thing existed. Oh, guess what? I'm just going to do it myself. So you're making the product for yourself. which is great to get started with. But it's a big mistake to think that you then are the customer and you're only making products for or services for, or the insight is yours. You're one, or maybe a handful of people that maybe think similar to you. You've got to go out there really understand what the customer wants. I think that's where innovation starts from. Innovation is like, there's no point innovating the product because you can think of a better way of making it or a cheaper way of making it, or it'll just be a better product because you think it. Likely won't be any relevance to the customer. You have to have a very clear target market in mind to start with. And a lot of people think, I can sell this to everybody, like fresh soup, right? I remember, people saying to us, you can sell a fresh soup to everybody. I said, well, yeah, we might be eventually, but we're not trying to sell fresh soup to everybody. We're trying to sell soup which is fresh to people who really appreciate the product and the freshness and the quality. And we're not trying to compete with canned soup. We're not trying to eat their dinner, literally or otherwise, or eat their lunch. We're trying to say those people who don't buy canned soup will buy our soup because our soup is different, right? So we had a consumer insight, and we had a very clear target market in mind. And I think if you try to sell to everybody, you end up selling to nobody. So you really do need to understand that, and you need to develop your brand around all of that. So brand and marketing and consumer awareness, innovation, all hang together. So I think the answer to your question, what should people do? The flippant answer is innovate better. But how do you do that? Well, insight, really understand, chase after these customers and bring it as narrow as you possibly can. Don't worry about selling it to everybody. Bring it as narrow as you possibly can and really delight those guys. And then after a while, you'll find other people will catch on to this and it'll broaden out. And suddenly you'll have like we had a market share all to ourselves in the first few years. And New Covent Garden Soup Company, 40 years later, is still the market leader. So something was right there.
Yeah. It's really interesting anchoring in the consumer insight. We have a guest whose episode hasn't published yet, but Jim Weber, who's the CEO of Brooks Running Shoes. And he essentially brought that company, I think it was doing 60 million in revenue, built it to 1.7 billion. Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway invests in it. And he said the whole thing was anchoring on the consumer. We realized performance running shoes was the thing. And if we could serve that niche, we didn't need to do all the things that Nike did, right? It was sort of this David and Goliath story.
Sure. And there's a great example. I'm going to mention it now, and forgive me if I do. But basically, Rapha, the bikes. I don't know if people are into riding bikes. Rapha, R-A-P-H-A, wonderful Italian originated, I think. Anyway, very successful entrepreneurial breakthrough brand, purpose-driven brand. Did a lot of things right, and then Walmart bought it. And ruined it because I have no idea why they ever bought it. I mean, nothing wrong with leaving it the way it is. Nothing wrong with Walmart to do those things wonderfully. But the whole entrepreneurial spirit about really in touch with the consumer and the customer really liking and aping almost the identity of the brand and becoming the brand and being eager to know what comes out next. Suddenly, it's not Rapha anymore. It's Walmart. And thinking, oh, how boring is that? I don't want to be associated with that brand anymore. I go somewhere else. And of course, by then the competition had begun. And lots of other little guys, and they went to them. And the revenue went down, share price went down. Well, it was owned by Walmart then. But it's really difficult to kind of buy emerging brands and successfully bring them into your business. Never mind actually being perceived by the target audience that bought them in the first place that's okay. They were perceived to be selling out. They were perceived to be doing all sorts of things which Rapha customers didn't want them to do, and they ruined it for everybody. Although the guys got out quickly, I guess they didn't care.
Well, so let me ask you this. Let's play that out a little bit. What does Walmart do then, right? Because Walmart wants that intimate connection with a certain subset of a consumer, and maybe they did not have the Italian biking enthusiast, right? And they said, hey, that's who the only people that don't go to Walmart's are the Italian biking enthusiasts. If we buy Rapha, we're going to expand our market and we'll be able to sell them all the other things that we sell. What is a Walmart to do in a scenario like that?
Well, I think the decision is too late. Once they made the decision, I wouldn't do it. And it's so easy for me to sit here after the event and go, you put it all together. Any idiot could have come up with that plan. Well, nobody did in Walmart. There's so many case studies spoke about it that, I could have predicted that. Well, Did you? You know, it's easy to say it after the event. Like much of my career, I got to admit, it's all post rationalization. I got to think that Walmart usually are pretty good at understanding who the consumer base is, but they've got such a large organization, and they're a retailer, of course, as well. Really, so they have lots of different brands under their umbrella. I'm kind of thinking, and I spent some time in the States. The middle business was the soup company that didn't actually work. It was based in California, so we didn't supply Walmart, but lots of other large US retailers. And I kind of think, you know, I think you need to let the little brand do its own work and not be associated, not be too associated with it. In other words, be a retailer. You know, they're very efficient, obviously, very large, very efficient, very good at what they do. They really understand that people who come through the front door, what they want to buy, and they can upsell lots of other stuff. But they bought the business. I think that you don't need to buy a business. They're looking at adding revenue in lots of ways outside of retail. It's difficult to do once you get to a certain critical mass. You know, I think you can do partnerships and work with other brands of a similar size, but getting to own those businesses, especially when that business is, it can be, in hindsight at least, can be identified as something completely different to the monolith of that Walmart has become. I think, you know, from the other side of the fence, understanding your consumer is so important as well. And if you think that's a great business, I think I'll buy it. Well, that's a great business for them and the way they do it. I wonder if I buy it, will it still work the same way? At least they were hoping they could help, not just have it work the same way. So I think strategically, we need to understand what your M&A policy is and what your strategic plan is. And it's not always easy in the moment. You've got this shiny object, which is really sexy, and you're probably paying over the odds. I think they did for it anyway. I think you really need to know how you're going to then milk it and how you're going to turn it, how you're going to absorb it. And in hindsight, it doesn't look like they had a plan. Because if they had developed some scenarios, this would be one of the plan, actually what happened. And then they would have gone, what are we going to do to avoid that happening? To me, the answer is don't buy.
Right. Very interesting. Well, so let me bring you back here on this. One of the things I always love with the role that you're in, you're seeing all the startups that are emerging. You're seeing some large company points of view as well. What do you see on the horizon for the fast-moving consumer goods market? Are there things that you think, if someone reads or listens to this 5 years from now, that's going to be a big thing that we don't know about today?
Yeah. So crystal ball. I don't know. My crystal ball, frankly, is any better than anybody else's. But I think there's a structural problem in the food industry right now. I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and that is, and I know we've got food poverty, so I don't want people ringing up or writing in and saying that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Apart from maybe I don't, but food is too cheap. That's ultimately the problem that the food industry has. Food is too cheap. I give you an example of, well, it's not an example. It's just it's a fact. Of 1955, discretionary spend on food that you eat in the home was 35%. So 35% of your discretionary spend, okay, after your rent or whatever you do in a house, the discretionary stuff you got left over, 35% of that was spent on food that you eat in the home. Now, if you roll that forward to today, go back to 2020, because we have had a lot of food inflation since COVID and stuff. But 2020, it was 7%. So it's gone from 35% to 7% in kind of a lifetime, or certainly a generation. And I kind of think both are wrong, right? I think the pendulum sits probably somewhere in the middle. So therefore, 7%, basically we have all become conditioned to, especially in the UK. And in other countries too, it's not an awful lot different. Excuse me. To food being ever cheaper. We just assume that food can be cheaper. And the problem that generates is that two things. Number one, the food industry tries to cut corners to save costs. So you end up with all these scandals happening. I don't know, the horse meat scandal and the dye scandal and all sorts of, and people just don't know what's in food anymore, and rightly complain about the fact that it's poor quality and it's not very healthy. And of course, it's been re-engineered to be cheap because people are prepared to pay enough for it. So that's kind of the reality. So the second problem is then the margins are very low. Yeah. And the margins are very low in that industry. Lots of problems that you don't attract necessarily investment. You don't attract necessarily the best people like tech does. You don't necessarily have an opportunity to invest in the brand that you need to grow your business. If you've got a small margin, at some point, if you're really ambitious, ready to grow your business, you have to invest ahead of the curve in your brand. You got to bring money in from outside. So you're constantly distracted raising. when you don't need to in other industries, maybe. It very much depends what your objective is. So, long way of saying that, a lot of problems in the food industry stem from that. And I think while people say price matters, but not as much as it did before, I don't see that much evidence. I think price still matters. I think value is even more important, especially through branding and premiumization. If you can give consumers, again, back to your consumer insight, if you can give consumers really strong reasons to buy your product at a 5-10% premium to the competition, then that's the interesting conversation to be had there. You got to do it with authenticity and be credible, and you can't just bullshit them. Frankly, you got to have reasons, not that you believe, but that they believe, and so you need to be understand what they mean. So it's all about product range. It's all about product quality. It's got to taste good. We've gone on down this road of sustainability, and we've gone down this road of health, and a lot of time it doesn't taste good, so it doesn't really work. And price premium is a new standard. I think people aren't prepared to, as much as they were before, pay premiums for. Pay more for premium, or pay more for sustainability, like carbon emissions and fair trade certifications. They're all standard. Organic. People don't want to pay for that stuff anymore. It used to be the case 2010, 5 years ago. We were all organic, great. They still say organic, great, but give it to me for the same price as the other stuff. So that's the problem. So these price pressures, and the retailers don't help, but the consumers become accustomed to people being cheaper. So I think, to answer your question, it's going to be different in 5 years' time. I think that the brands that really figure that out, and because brands are, you got to watch out here. It used to be you establish a brand like New Covent Garden and people are very loyal. I think consumers are much more fickle now, and they're constantly looking for reasons to justify the price. So I think, and this, this terminology called, what's it called again? The say to pay gap. What people say and what they do, what they pay for, are two completely different things. And I think sustainability has been a great example of that. Oh yeah, you've got to be sustainable. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got to save the planet. Well, it's going to cost more. Oh no, I'm not going to pay any more. Well, how do you save the planet then? Oh, you got to find a way to save the planet and do this, and be cost effective, and be healthy, and all those pressures together put a lot of supply chain and efficiency and productivity and all those. But people got to continue to do that. The industry needs to continue to do that. But I think don't rely on the things that got you to win before. And I think focus much more so on what the consumer wants and what we need to pay for. I think there's always going to be a need for brands. I think it's all about innovation, back to the previous question. Innovate where you deliver value to the consumer. So if it wasn't important before, and it's really important now to know what turns the consumer on, what really motivates them. What in this case, what will allow them to pay that extra 10%. Whereas before it might have been an easier argument. But I think today it's much more difficult, and I think you got to be much more genuine and authentic and be clear about it. And so it's not easy, but I think maybe in 5 years' time you'll see more brands who still survive being effectively doing that.
John, I love it. Thank you so much. Where can people go to learn more about Mission Ventures?
Oh, right. Well, I mean, Mission Ventures is one thing that I do, but of course, yeah.
Or follow you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's number of ways to answer that question. If it's particularly Mission Ventures, what I was saying about earlier, from a small business or a large business point of view, it doesn't matter. Look up the website, missionventures.co.uk. We're there, or just DM me. Look me up on LinkedIn. It's John B. Stapleton. That's the easy way to get hold of me. You probably find my email address there. It's very easy. John@stapleton.eu. Just my name. But DM me on LinkedIn, and I'll eventually get around to responding, and we can have a conversation about something that triggered you and you want to know more about. Love to.
Awesome. Well, John, thank you so much for everything you're doing to spark change in the industry and for your time today.
Not at all. You're very welcome. I hope it made sense, everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks a lot, Fred.